Good evening. I will now call the March 14th, 2023 meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I would like to introduce our participants tonight. To my immediate left, Vice Chair Marcus LeGrand, Director Amy Tatum, Director Keena Chadwick, and joining us remotely is Director Shirley Olson. To my immediate right is Superintendent Stephen Cook, Deputy Superintendent Laura Nordquist, and Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski, and I am Melissa Barnes-Delakia, Chair of the Board. We have Aaron Trimble and Kayla Celadon joining us for ASL interpretation, and a Spanish interpretation of the meeting is being provided on the BLS School Board YouTube page. Can we put Shirley in the meeting? All right, thank you. Now that we have Director Olson, I will invite you to stand, remove your hats, and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now move to review of the agenda. Dr. Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Fellow board members, are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing no requests for changes, we will proceed with the agenda as noticed. We'll now move into item number 4, which is our district recognitions, and I will hand it over to Superintendent Cook.
Check, check. All right. Ben Lapine Schools is dedicated to helping students experience mental health challenges for crises and major transitions. One essential way we do this is through the work of student success coordinators in every school, an investment we have made through our Student Success Act resources. This month's Champion for Students Award shines a light on this vitally important role. We are very pleased today to recognize Lindsay Korstad. Lindsay, would you please come up? Round of applause, thank you. Okay, so there's a camera right there, taking pictures, and there's one over there, so just want you to know where they're at, okay? Lindsay is our Student Success Coordinator at Jewell Elementary School. There's Scott back there. Oh, he's got a camera too. Scott's back there as well. We got a big fan. I love this. Lindsay has been with Ben Lapine Schools for 6 years, first as a school counselor and for the past 2 years as Student Success Coordinator at Jewell Elementary. In that role, she builds relationships and provides a safe space where students feel loved and accepted for who they are. She often works with students whose behavior may be disruptive to learning as they are experiencing crisis or serious challenges in the classroom. Lindsay coordinates their care, working with teachers, families, and outside providers with the focus always on what students are doing well. Lindsay and our other student success coordinators, support students in learning social skills and self-regulation so that they can more safely and effectively express their emotions. This helps students to make positive choices and to learn in their general education classrooms alongside their peers more effectively. In her very own words, Lindsay says, you should say this, the goal for the student I work with is for them to be working, learning, and thriving as a part of their classroom and the greater school community. So here's what some of her colleagues had to say about her. She is known for being compassionate, professional, and respectful. Coworker Chi Komaki says, working with staff members like Lindsay makes me proud to be a part of Ben Lapine Schools. Principal Scott Edmondson says, and he's right over there, Lindsay is an integral member of the RE Jewel staff. She serves and supports our students, families, and staff in numerous ways, and her passion, commitment, and professionalism are an inspiration for others on our staff. Finally, Lindsay shares this about her very own work. Students receiving student success services at Jewel are growing and benefiting from the wraparound and high-level case management that they get every single day. Sometimes the growth appears slow, but I believe we are laying the groundwork to mitigate the many layers of trauma our students have experienced or are currently experiencing. Lindsay, on behalf of the Board of Directors and Ben Lapine Schools, it is my great honor to present you this month's Champion for Students Award. Stand up, stand up, stand up. He didn't know he was supposed to stand up. Yeah, this is awesome. So Ben Lapine Schools Champion for Students proudly presented on March 14th, 2023 to Lindsay Korstad in recognition of your commitment to students experiencing significant mental health challenges or who are in transition or crisis. Thank you for your tireless work to help students learn social, emotional, and regulation skills. You exemplify how student success coordinators assist our most vulnerable students in becoming learning, thriving members of their classroom and school community. Lindsay, just love to hear something from you. This is such we talked early in this year about some challenges, and if anybody deserves this, it is so you. Actually, let me hold that while I can hand you this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This is quite an honor and a surprise. And I just really love that I get to work at Jewel and I get to work with the team that I work with. And I think that's what brings me joy, that I'm able to share with the students I work with. I have the best admin who are so supportive and allow me to be creative and our team to be creative and think of different ideas to try to see what helps students. And we have the best staff and the best students. So I'm very grateful and very honored that to be here. So thank you.
One more round of applause for Lindsay. Congratulations. Hey, Scott, can we get her family, can we get everybody up here and get a picture? Come on up. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No smiling, no smiling. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And that's it for our recognitions.
Thank you. We'll now move into item number 5, public comment. The board and district leadership value communication from students, families, staff, and community members as it helps us to guide the work of Ben Lapine Schools. Public comment is just one of many avenues available to ensure this connection. Members of the public are always welcome to submit thoughts, questions, concerns to the board via email, as well as in writing, and individual board members may make themselves available for phone, video, or in-person conversations. This said, I want to remind the public that while this is a meeting of the Board of Directors in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting for the board to discuss district business. And as such, the board will not be responding to public comment made during tonight's meeting, and instead issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person to follow up with you. A timer is provided on the large screen to ensure every speaker receives updates during the presentation on remaining time. And we had one individual request to speak, so at this time we will hear from Mark Koopman.
Got a green light. Good evening. I am Mark Koopman, or Coop. I'm a health teacher at High Desert Middle School, and some of you might know me from the news where I was called unfettered, but we'll chat about that in the future. While my comments tonight are related to the integrated plan and how it relates to ORS 329.496, the required 225 minutes per week that middle school students are to average in physical education over the course of the entire year. ODE sent out a memo earlier this year outlining an updated implementation timeline indicating schools need to be in full compliance by fall of 2025. I am not sure where our elementary schools are in meeting Senate Bill 4. I am sure that none of our middle schools are in compliance. However, tonight, I'm really here to advocate for middle school health. As the district moves forward in planning on how to meet the middle school PE requirements, this provides the district an opportunity to address a curricular area that has been neglected for a very long time. A comprehensive skills-based health course needs to be part of the discussion. Time doesn't permit me to go into all of our health standards, but I ask you to take a closer look at them. You'll find skills like students will demonstrate the ability to use interpersonal communication to enhance health and avoid or reduce health risks. Upon examining the skills-based health standards, you will also notice how they complement SEL or CASEL standards, as well as the ethnic studies standards. I hope to implore you and the district to be proactive in addressing the Senate Bill 4 PE requirements. The longer we wait, the more reactive and disruptive the solution will be. And I worry health and health education at the middle school level will suffer the most. To this end, I encourage you to reach out to your middle school health teachers and to utilize the work in progress with our Healthy Schools Partnership and Amy Snyder's team. I want to thank the board for their time, and happy Pi Day.
Thank you very much, and happy Pi Day. We'll now move into item number 6, which is the board chair report. Thank you all for being here tonight. I have only really one thing to report on this evening, which is that we are in the process of doing our superintendent evaluation. We were able to meet with our superintendent in executive session prior to this meeting to review the board goals that we have set, as well as the strategic initiatives that were identified going into this school year. It is always a pleasure for us to be able to meet with the superintendent and to hear about all of the work that he has been doing, but also all of the staff within Ben Lapine Schools, and really feel that our district in the last couple of years has taken significant steps to provide alignment across all of our vertical alignment and horizontal alignment in terms of what we are doing and where we are moving, and that our board goals now live jointly held by the board of directors and by the district staff and cabinet, and are the foundation now for how we are evaluating our superintendent, as well as reflecting on our own work. I believe continues to bring the alignment necessary to push our work forward. And so thank you, Superintendent Cook, for all of your work. And thank you to my fellow board members as well in thinking about our board work and then what is laying ahead of us. So with that said, I will hand it over to Superintendent Cook for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Barnes-Delacqui. I have two items that I'd like to share for our superintendent's report tonight. And before I do, I want to qualify this and just remind folks that a couple of meetings ago, there was data presented to the board on, I will just call it working conditions and some of the things that are going on in the system right now. There's been lots of conversations around that. We've got a committee that's diving into that work and just digging in and asking to get more clarity about that. And I'll just remind folks that the Oregon Statewide Educators Survey is still open. They extended the deadline on that. So if we've got teachers out there that have not filled out that report, we would love to hear your input on that as well. So we're seeking and desiring staff feedback at this point. So the first thing I want to talk about is not related to that. The second thing I want to talk about is. The first thing I want to talk about is back in November, we talked with COSA, the administrative organization that oversees administrators in the state of Oregon, about coming in and doing a evaluation, a systems review for our Department of Equity, for our multilingual community in our schools, and just give us some feedback on how that system is performing, almost like a SWOT analysis. Tell us about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities we have, and maybe some of the threats. We've gotten the first draft of that report back, and it's been a tremendous insight into some things that we're doing. I'm glad to share that. It's not ready for prime time yet, as we are still processing that. We'll be sharing that as early potentially as later this week, but I'm excited to tell you that there's lots of accommodations in that document and lots of focal points for us to move and grow from. That process was meaningful and helpful, and just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that, and that we'll be releasing that in a very near future once we have the right opportunity to finish that review. We have gotten that just in the last couple of days, so I need to process that a little bit, but we'll make that available. I think the second thing I want to talk about does directly relate to the ongoing conversation we've been having across the district about working conditions, and specifically this one I want to touch on is about student discipline. And I think when we talk about student discipline, we're talking about what the learning environment looks like when dysregulation happens with one or more students, and what that does to impact the learning experience. And so we've started the kind of what I would call the long game on really solving what I would consider a very complicated problem that is not unique to us right now. This is going on across the country, but this is something that we're committed to. And one of the strategies is to take the current committee work that we're doing now, expand that to be more inclusive of more folks. And we're gonna call that a task force. I don't know that we've got an official name for it yet. We want the task force itself to be kind of responsible for naming themselves, if you will, but working through what are going to be long-term solutions for this, that balance, the need to have, I don't know, a safe and effective learning environment, but also is providing students feedback and staff the resources they need to be able to create that environment. And what administrative can we do, whether it's by policy, whether it's by resource allocation, you name it, how are we going to solve this very deep and complicated problem? That's begun. That task force construction has begun, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to ask Laura to jump in here and just talk a little bit about how that partnership, as you know, we're partnering with OSEA, we're partnering with our building administrator groups, and we're also partnering with BEA in the construction of this task force to really dig in and solve what I consider really complex problems. So Laura?
Yeah, I'd love to provide a quick update. I've been working with Debbie Christian from OSEA and Sarah Barclay. And one of the first things we needed to do was who's going to participate in this. And we wanted to give all stakeholders some voice, but we didn't want a task force of 965 people. So we have a number of teacher representatives, a number of classified representatives. We'll have building leader representatives and district leader representatives, as well as the presidents of both associations. So Sarah and Debbie have finished up. We wanted to make sure we had as many different buildings in the district represented as possible. So we asked them, hey, you tell us your members first, and then we'll add names. So we're working on, I think we should be able to finalize that list by the end of this week. In the meantime, Dave Van Loo has been charged with gathering together some important reading or viewing or listening. We don't want people to have to do 25 hours of homework, but we feel like the work needs to be grounded in best practices. And so, and Debbie and Sarah were also invited if they had ideas. So everybody's first assignment on the task force will be actually to spend some time reading or listening, and of course they'll be compensated for that time. So we think our first actual session, and we're looking at probably half-day sessions, so we have time to really dig in, will be mid-April, yet working on a date right now. Another thing that we thought was important is that because this is a volatile topic and there's a lot of passion and emotion, that it'd be good to have an outsider come in and facilitate who has the skills and knowledge to do that. So I was in conversation, I have been in conversation with Whitney Swander. If you don't know Whitney, she works now with United Way, formerly worked with Better Together, with what used to be Together for Children, and has really, in fact, she was thrilled and excited because she thinks this is such a powerful opportunity for us all to grow together. So that's where we are right now. Stay tuned.
Oops, thank you very much. We will now move into our consent for action agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Director Tatum has moved and Vice Chair LeGrand has seconded. Are there any requests to remove something from the consent agenda? Hearing no requests, I will call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes 5-0. We will now move into the consent for information. The district is adopting CCB-AP, GB-AP, GCC/GDC-AP, and JEBA-AP as originally presented. The district is deleting GCCA-AR, GCCB-AR, GCCC-AR, GCCD-AR, and JEBA-AR. No public feedback was received on any of the policies. We will now move into our action items. And our first action item is the Budget Committee vacancy. And I will hand this over to Superintendent Cook.
Thank you, Chair Barnes-Delakia. As our last business meeting, if you recall, we had a discussion about maybe changing the process to essentially empower the Equity Coalition, our Equity Committee, which is now state mandated. We've just as recently as September, that went into expectation of the state. As you know, we've had our committee for a longer period of time than that. But the recommendation was made, I think, with consensus across the board that we turn that decision over to, is there a member of the Equity Coalition that would be willing to consider serving as a new participant to the Budget Committee? And what we have before you is Robert Penson. So I'd ask Robert to stand up and just wave. Robert has been nominated by, Robert, they're taking your picture, get your picture taken. Has been nominated by the Equity Coalition to be the representative to the Budget Committee. And we would support that recommendation. We'd like to place that before you for your consideration. As you know, the board is required to take action on that nomination, and we would recommend that you support that nomination.
I will move to appoint Robert Penson to the BLS Budget Committee.
I'll second that motion.
Director Tatum has moved. Director Chadwick has seconded. Is there any discussion? I would just like to share a huge appreciation. Robert has been an amazing person within our district and in the Equity Coalition, and we are truly privileged to have you step forward in this role for the Budget Committee, so thank you.
They haven't voted yet, so we're not sure about that.
I said
yet.
step forward, we're gonna vote, and then it's gonna be official. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
I heard all five this time, so motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Robert.
Fantastic. We are now moving to item 10B, which is the Desert Sky Montessori request for charter renewal with Deputy Superintendent Nordquist.
Yes, as you remember, let's see, last month, Desert Sky Montessori presented to us little information about the school and the request for the renewal of their charter. We had the public hearing last month, so what's left today is to approve the charter, and then at that point, the district will begin negotiations about the charter renewal with Desert Sky. And in truth, we met with Heather today, so that process has already launched, but we're waiting formal approval from the board.
Do I have a motion to approve Desert Sky Montessori charter renewal?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the Desert Montessori charter renewal.
I'll second.
Okay, Vice Chair, and if I have this correctly, Vice Chair LeGrand has moved to approve Desert Sky Montessori's charter contract renewal request and for the district to begin contract negotiations. Yes. And Director Tatum has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Director Olson?
Aye.
Fantastic. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. And then I do believe that we'll have some information. As you're doing your negotiations, then we'll have some additional information on the holdback, for lack of a
Yes,
better.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And while you're up there, we'll move straight into number 10C, which is our district integrated plan with Deputy Superintendent Nordquist.
And again, presented on this in February. And then you've had the opportunity to see many documents associated with that. It's quite, the benefit is one plan. The drawback is there's lots of information that's expected as part of that plan. And I think I made it clear in February, but I want to reiterate to the board, we have to submit budgets for our student investment account spending and our high school success spending, and we don't know what those amounts will be. So the documents that you saw are our best estimate of what those will be, but, and I don't think they would be hugely different, but they may not be exactly what we are submitting, and that's the situation with every district in the state of Oregon, because we must submit by March 31st. We had everything shortly after. It wasn't up right on the 14th because we had a couple of documents to get ready, but we have had it up for at least three weeks. And Mark Koopman was our sole respondent. Mark and I had an opportunity to talk on the phone, and then he came today to express some short-term and long-term concerns. And just so the board knows, the issue with the required PE minutes, we actually have, Dr. Cook and I have a follow-up conversation with the Oregon Department of Education about that and our plan because of questions raised about it. So we are pursuing that and want to make sure we're doing the right thing. But with that, I'll present the integrated plan.
Do we have a motion to approve the district's integrated plan as presented?
I will move to approve the district's integrated plan as presented.
And I will second that motion.
Director Tatum has moved. Vice Chair LeGrand has seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no discussion, we will vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Director Olson? Director Olson?
She's muted.
We will do 4-0 with motion passing right now, and then I will invite Shirley, Director Olson, to add her vote when we have her back. With that, thank you very much. We'll now move into our reports, and starting with 11A with Superintendent Cook and our Strategic Priorities Budget Workshop.
Melissa?
Yes.
That would be an aye vote.
Thank you. We will add that, and motion passes 5-0.
I think I did this last year from this location. It's the one time a year I get to go out and stand at the podium and have people behind me, and that's a little awkward. Yeah, I can move it a little closer. Is that a little better? Okay. Well, thank you, directors. It's my pleasure to present to you. This is the official kickoff of the budget season. And as Dr. Nordquist just mentioned to you, we're kicking off our budgeting process without knowing how much money we're going to get from the state, which is a little out of sequence. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time before we get into goals and values that align how we spend the money we get from the state so that it reflects what it is that we expect and that we want from the system so that every kid, every student experience their best learning potential and opportunities. I want to ground that in some of the foundational pieces of how we're funded and how that all works. Officially, this is all pretty high level. From this point, then we push all this information to the budget committee and then have them partner with you in that process. And so we're making no decisions tonight. This is just getting the ball rolling, if you will. So I want to start with where have we been? And I actually want to go back quite a ways, as a matter of fact. I want to talk about the Oregon State School Fund for about the last decade. And if you notice, before I get too far into this, I want to clarify, this is specific to general fund budget only. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the other revenue sources that that Dr. Nordquist even mentioned to some extent. But this is if you look at the track record since the 2011-2012 biennium or 2011-2013 biennium, we've almost doubled the amount of dollars that are being committed by the state legislature to public education. And if you remember, bienniums, it's a 2-year process. They typically, not every year, but they fund the first year at 49% of that total and the second year at 51%. And that's just so that you can absorb roll-up costs that happen during an annual, just a regular year. So if you look at that, you can see that we've had there for about 3-4 biennia in a row, we had what I would consider almost double-digit increases in that cost recommendation for what it takes to meet the needs of educating our students in Oregon. Most recently, the last 2 biennia, we've had much more modest increases nonetheless, but much more modest. And if you look at this particular graph specifically all the way to the column on the very farthest right, you can see the year-over-year change in percentage to funding. As it comes through that 49%, 51% distribution, you can actually see the math and how that works. And so just simple increase in costs. If you wanted to talk about inflation or if you wanted to talk about some percentage of a raise or any of those kinds of things, that would be what that percentage would be best used for informing. And so I think it's important to qualify this, and I think it's important to recognize this as we haven't started that funding for this year. Right now, the last one you see on this list, 23-25 biennium, is 9.9 recommended for the governor's budget. That has not been adopted yet. We're still advocating. I don't know if you know this, but we have pushed across all administrators across the state, agreed that we said 10.3 billion was going to be what it would take to meet the roll-up cost and the needs to continue our current service level, not adding new programming, not adding new expectations, not adding additional legislative requests or demands that could come out. And so just to meet those expectations, we believe at 10.3. As a matter of fact, you'll see this later on when we get into deeper detail. If we don't have new information, a $9.9 billion allocation would cause a budget cut for us. And so we're pushing and promoting legislators every chance we get. More is necessary. Now, translate that over our enrollment so you can think about those biennia. And over the last 4 years, you can see that our enrollment has dropped, but then gotten fairly steady at this 17,000, around 500 kids. So as that funding comes, essentially we do this weighted enrollment to calculate how those funds are coming to us. There's some modifications that happen for students with special need factors, or if we have students that are high in poverty. Those kinds of weightings will increase that funding source for us. So generally, think about that as how we impact the general fund budget. Right now, those resources, when that biennium allocation is actually authorized, will come to us as a general fund budget. Right now, that is $210 million as available resource in our fund, in our general fund. Laura mentioned, and I'll talk about this a little more later, that we also get money through the SIA, through Student Investment Account and High School Success. Those two funds together for this current year right now total out to be about an $18.4 million addition annually for a revenue source for helping us meet the goals and expectations that we've set to deliver upon the vision that we set. And the Budget Committee helps us in establishing those processes along the way. One factor I'll add, ESSER dollars still have one more year to spend. Next year is the last year we can spend ESSER dollars. And if you recall, that was ESSER 3 was the last allocation of that. That was a total of $18.9 million. That there's some remnant of that. I'm going to leave that to Leah and Brad to share you how much we have left over. But that's one-time funds. When that's gone at the end of next year, that's it. That money is no longer available. So, I don't have to tell you about this, but I do want to make sure we know and remember what those goals are. Board goal number 1 is the fact that we want a strong academic foundation for every student, as measured by these agreed upon measurements. Those measures are established by you all, and we are tracking those, and we will be reporting out on each and every one of these measures for each and every goal. Board goal 2, the passion, plan, and purpose for every student. And helping them find their path through that. Those are the board measured goals and agreed upon those. We're tracking those now as we speak. So if you take that all the way back to the original allocation and you think about that biennium agreed upon funding, we get our allocation based upon our weighted enrollment for the year, and then we then distribute those funds to help us meet these goals. Board goal 3, which is one that probably has gotten the most traffic this year. It's definitely the one we've talked about the most. It's also the one that I would say that we've seen the most explicit investment over these past 2 years, is making sure that students, families, and staff are feeling wellness and inclusion and a sense of belonging in our schools. Much of the data that we share in this one, it's a very tough thing to measure, but we can measure this through perception data for staff, for students, and for our families. And board goal 4, we don't talk about this one as much because it's so behind the scenes, but it's all of the systems that we are putting in place to ensure that the first 3 goals that we talk about, which are student outcome goals or family outcome goals, that those systems support and align to that work. This has got a lot of attention behind the scenes, and I would tell you we're seeing some impact because of that. Now, this is why this matters. If you go all the way back to the amount of money we get, $210 million for general budget, another $18 million and change for SIA and high school success, think about the fact that if 85% of every dollar we get is spent on people. So when we talk about decisions that are going to be about achieving vision, achieving goals, most of the time we're talking about how we're investing in staff, how we're investing in people to achieve all of those commitments that we're making. Very few decisions in that 15% of the budget that's not invested in people are really discretionary. It's things like paying our water bill, paying our utility bills, upkeep of facilities, and just general maintenance of our stuff. There are a few things, like we can choose to buy Chromebooks or we can choose to buy iPads where we might have a little bit of discretion, but those dollars are fairly fixed. The 85% of our general budget and those other funds that we're spending on people is where we have that flexibility, and that's where we work through with our budget committee to ensure that that spend is being most effectively utilized. And we've made decisions like reduce class size. So we're gonna invest in the way you reduce class size is you put more staff into our schools. Or we commit to adding additional staff into classrooms. And we've done that, whether they're teachers or they're EAs and assistants. However, if we have decreased enrollment or if we have increased enrollment, that's going to impact that because that funding, how much we get, whatever that original allocation is, goes back to dividing by some portion of that's in each and every district, and that's how we're funded. I just want this to be up here for this reason, because the SIA, the Student Investment Account, is so specific to how that spend is allocated, which Laura just mentioned, Dr. Norquist just mentioned in her presentation. Those $18.4 million between Student Investment Account and High School Success also align to our goals. And so it's important that we don't separate that from the decisions that we make as a group, but we also remember how those dollars are being spent. These are the regulations of how those dollars are meant to be spent with regarding Student Investment Account, and this is how we've chosen to spend them. And so you see training, you see additional staff, you see staff in some of our most highly impacted schools, increasing the number of those staff being committed to those. And you can see how those dollars are allocated. $6 million for social emotional support needs for students, $3.5 million to expand students' access with more staffing, and to $3 million, including some ESSER dollars, to also reduce class size. That was a commitment in our last budget process for the SIA dollars. And so while this isn't what we're talking about now when we talk about kicking off the budget process, I don't think it's correct to think about our values without thinking about how we're supplementing those resources to meet those needs. Additionally, I want to do the same thing with High School Success, I think was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, with a very specific goal of increasing graduation rates, decreasing the number of dropouts, making sure we're providing students access into career and technical education pathways, and giving students more opportunities for college level and beyond systems while they're still in high school. Those dollars are having tremendous impact. You often hear us talk about like our grad centers in our schools. That's where these dollars are being allocated. Additional administrators to help support students. Our student success coordinators, right? We just gave an award to one of our best at Jewell Elementary School. These dollars are coming out of SIA, they're coming out of our high school success plan, and they're also helping us meet those needs. And we've seen positive trends on this. So our graduation rate has now, for about the last decade, increased in a general trend manner, very steady, very gentle increase as it's going up. We are seeing a better impact just through the process that Laura just mentioned, through the integrated planning process. We're seeing a much more engaged community dialogue about what does our community want for our student population, what do they want for our graduates, and what are we going to do to make sure our graduates are meeting the needs of the community, and where are we falling short with that, and how we embed that in this decision making so that it is collective, it's with the board, it's with our budget committee, and we're giving that feedback throughout the system. So how have we invested these dollars? There's the unsung kind of hero of this whole conversation is the fact that when SIA and High School Success were implemented, it was the largest single investment outside of the general funds in the history of the state. And what have we chosen to do with those dollars, which also in turn is going to help influence how we budget our general fund budget as well. We have targeted classroom reduction, our class size reduction, especially in our more highly impacted schools. We have invested in health and safety improvements across our schools, both with staff, with direct actions that we're doing in our schools. This has been a very intentional investment over time. Increasing access to classes for top-end classes in our high schools and in our middle schools, increasing the elective opportunities, career technical education opportunities for students, and pathways that are going to provide them life after their secondary experience. So where are we going? Okay, this is what I would tell you at this point right now. We are very interested as we talk about the new budgeting process, as we kick this off, working with our budget committee, who Robert, as you know, is now our newest member of the budget committee, is making sure we stay true to the goals that currently exist in our system, continuing with academic excellence, continuing that, providing students with that purpose plan and pathway, and making sure that that sense of belonging exists in every school, and supporting the work that goes on behind the scenes in those operational systems that are about making sure those systems align to and support the outcome goals that we want for our kids. You're going to hear us talk about things like doubling down on our foundational reading skills, making sure that we're promoting basic reading, the science of reading right now in our K-5 schools, the fact that and the fact that this new adoption of really great reading is already having very positive impact. Providing access to rigorous learning opportunities, whether we're talking about career technical education, advanced placement, you name it, whatever it is, providing more access across the district, all of our schools. Goal 2 is continue that life and career readiness continuum. You've heard Stephen and Jennifer talk about that pathway. Also advancing or adding more courses and more pathways for students to have early success, whether it's early entry into college dual credit classes or expanding those opportunities. And last but not least, but increasing our supports here. We've had a lot of success here. We still feel like we've got a ways to go as well on making sure that our schools, number one, are safe, not just physically safe, but creating emotionally safe environments as well. Making sure that we're talking about what happens and how we respond when they aren't safe. What happens when there's an event? What happens if students or staff act unsafe to each other? If we have bias interactions, bias training and interactions, how we record that, how we report that. How do we then restore when one of those events take place? And continued implementation of social emotional learning curriculum across all of our schools. Staff, as I've mentioned several times now, goal 4 is not the sexiest goal to talk about. It's really how are we making sure that our systems support the hard work. One of the things that we do want to make sure we're doing more of is that we're including and getting and gathering more staff feedback as we build those systems. Actually getting more student voice as well. I see Jackie in the back of the room here, and I see one of our student voice council members sitting in the room, getting students involved in some of that decision making so that input is built into the system, and then just making clear, consistent expectations and the systems make sense with the staff, so that everybody knows and understands why those decisions were made. If you'll notice right here, this is the number we're going to go with right now. We believe our projected, when you roll up our current enrollment grades and you include what we expect to get with kindergarten, we see here we're going to project for next year just a slight increase in enrollment, not a large one. In fact, I would say that that's probably really fairly flat for us when you do the math on this. 100 more students roughly in a student population of 17,500 is not a large increase. And so that whatever the decision is made when the biennium funding is decided, you can see that it'll be very similar with that similar enrollment. And it all comes back to, as we start about the next few months in this process, are we doing what we need to do to make sure that we are fulfilling our promise to our students and to our community, whether or not we are meeting this goal of making sure that every student is known by name, strength, and need. They graduate ready for college and for their career and for being active member of their community. So here's the timeline. Now back to a little bit of specifics on this. We are going to have a budget proposal to the committee, which you all are members of that. So we expect to have that budget proposed April 11th. We sure hope we know what we're being funded by that time. It'll be a lot easier to get an accurate budget in place. May 9th, we would do the second hearing for that budget committee. May 23rd, we would do that here with you again. And then on June 20th, we would require and hope to have that budget adoption in place so that we're prepared to go into the fiscal year cleanly for the 23-24 school year. Questions? I get to do the easy part, which is this overview kickoff. And now Brad and Leah and all of the budget committee members and you all are going to have to do the hard lift of how are we going to earmark and allocate all those dollars in that spend.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. My question is, do you have any concerns about the lining of the systems that may concern you in doing this work to get the systems where you think they should be?
I think that what you're asking me with that question, Director LeGrand, is do I have concerns? I do have concerns. The concerns I have is that there are some systems that are just going to take time to build, and it's going to, we can't solve, those are complicated systems, just like we were talking about earlier with talking about the system of putting something comprehensively in for student discipline and how we're recording that and reporting that. That can't be solved in 3 months. That's going to take time and commitment. We'll use the example that we're doing right now in our Human Resources Department of adoption of UKG so that we can do better data collection and just improve efficiencies across the entire district with how we're processing paperwork for leave and clocking in and all those kinds of things that just, the second largest employer in the state, or excuse me, in the region, has to be able to put those into place. That's been a tremendous lift, but that lift's also taken almost a year to get to what I would say is about 80 or 90% functionality, and we're just working on getting all those tweaks and fixes finished. That's going to be the kind of systems that we're talking about, and that system work is critical for our success.
In terms of enrollment and the weighted average, Dr. Cook, you've mentioned to us that we've seen some pretty significant demographic changes. And so with the weighted average in the general fund, I believe it's a 1.5 for students experiencing poverty, and it's a double factor for the SIA. So in this budget, have we quantified the impact of our changing demographic population?
Yeah, that's a really fair question. I think the rough answer to that is we don't know the math on it yet. I think generally we've averaged, let me back up and give a little clarification to what I think you're speaking to. We've averaged in the mid 40s as it comes to, for about 6 or 7 years now, as it comes to the percentage of students that would qualify for free or reduced lunch, which, as you know, is a very strong indicator of poverty in the community. During the pandemic, none of those data were collected. And so you wind up with this unknown, and you've heard Dave say multiple times, that's one of our most highly impacted groups. And so that now that there's no longer an indicator for how we determine that. Well, this is the first year that we're starting to collect that data again. And right now it appears that we're in the high 20s as that goes, which is the very correct question as what would be the impact of 17,500 students with a 45% average percentage of free and reduced lunch participants at a weighted average of 1.5 in the general fund, and even double that for the SIA, versus now roughly 28%. I can tell you that there's a little bit of conversation about what might be better indicators that we could be moving away from that, but nothing right now leads me to believe that that's going to be a change for now. So there will be some number that's going to be a change in impact with that financially. As it relates to the budget, that's going to take somebody that's better at math than me to figure out what that difference would be, because one of that would be calculated at 9.3 billion for the previous biennium, whereas now whatever this last number becomes would give us a better idea of the calculation. So I think by the time we get a budget proposal together, we can do the math on that and have that ready for you. But that's absolutely, it's a real issue.
Director Olson, do you have any questions? Great, thank you, Superintendent Cook.
Thank you.
We'll now move into item 11B, which is our student, staff, and family wellness and belonging, and we will be led by Sean Reinhardt, our Executive Director of Student Services, and Kenzie Martin, our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Good evening. How are you? Oh, good. There it is. How's everyone doing? So tonight we're going to, let me make sure this works. Okay. So tonight we're going to present on board end number 3. And so Kenzie and I'll be introducing Jamie here in a minute. No.
I don't know.
That was weird.
It's been a long day.
Jamie here in a minute, and so we're presenting on. We're going to tag team on board end 3. So just to ground us all on what we're going to be talking about tonight, board end 3 is about wellness, inclusion, and belonging, and specifically, we're going to talk about 2 strategic priorities within that one. Jamie and I will talk about the Forward Project, and then Kenzie is going to talk about bias incident reporting, teaching, and tracking. So we've presented on the Forward Project before, but I want to talk a little bit more just to ground you out into what we're talking about. So The Forward Project is a grant that we got through our regional health partners. And it's a regional project, so all the districts are participating in it. And it's a project to help school districts implement their ADDIES plan, which is Senate Bill 52. And we were awarded $400,000 for the work, and we have this year and all the way through school year 25 to work on the projects that we had indicated through that. And as an aside, we were just notified last week that we were granted some more money towards this. So we're going to submit a supplement plan that's due May 8th that will allow us to do a little bit more work in terms of this. And one of the things that was centered in how we created our strategies, and everything in the Forward Project had to be created around strategies for suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention based on the evidence, the best evidence out there. And so the data that you're looking at right now is the main body of data that we use to inform the 4 strategies that we selected for how we were going to spend the dollars. And so I'll let you all read that and take a look at that. But the data that you're looking at is from the 2020 Oregon Student Health Survey, which is something that's administered to our students every 2 years. And there's a series of questions around mental health and suicidology. And when disaggregating the data, what we see is that we have higher rates of students thinking about or seriously considering attempting suicide in these demographic areas. So for other race and ethnicities, it's 46% higher. It's 275% higher for all other sexual orientations, and 100% higher, 101% higher for students who with eligible free and reduced lunch. And then the other piece of data that's very compelling in there involves the Positive Youth Development Benchmark. And just to remind you, within the Oregon Student Health Survey, there's a cluster of questions that, when put together, creates this idea of positive youth development. And what that is it's a measure of teens that report strong levels of individual health and confidence, adult support at school, and helping others in the community. And it's 6 specific questions that are there. And so as you can see, when students are not meeting that benchmark, it puts them at risk for suicide. So the strategies that we selected, the activities that we selected that we're going to talk about today are all really focused on specifically promoting wellness and promoting PYD and doing the things that we can do in schools where we'll increase the levels of positive youth development, but also addressing the specific needs of the groups that are at highest risk. So this is the strategy where I'm going to hand this off to Jamie, because one of our first strategies was we recognized that we need somebody who is really focused on promoting and advancing our ADDIES Act plan, and that's involving all of our prevention strategies that we do in schools, all of our screening and intervention practices, and then how we handle postventions. And so we funded a 0.2 FTE suicide prevention coordinator, which is Jamie Gunter. And Jamie has quite a few jobs in the district. She's a school counselor at Bentech Academy, and she's also a student success coordinator. So we got to honor one of her other students SSCs tonight. And she's also was a grad coach for a while because she works at a very small school where these roles are combined. But this year she's also serving as our suicide prevention coordinator. So Jamie, I want you to come up and you can talk about the other strategies that we've done. And what I want to say is the work that what she's been able to do in her role, even at point 2, has been tremendous in terms of us being able to implement a lot of these projects that we're doing and looking forward to what we're going to be doing in the next 2 years. Her role is going to be crucial, so I'm really happy we were able to bring her on board.
So the strategy I want to start with is Care Solace. I know that Jennifer Houth presented on this strategy, and so I wanted to share some of our March utilization data, which has been very successful for getting students into care. These are our key performance indicators from the March 1st data. So if you look at the one that's highlighted or circled in blue, those are the warm handoffs. Warm handoffs are staff referrals. Anybody can initiate a case to Care Solace. You can call yourself, but those are the ones that are initiated by staff. The one that's circled in red, those are appointments into care where we know we've had confirmation that families have actually attended an appointment. One of the really exciting things about Care Solace is they actually analyzed our data for us, and they told us that based on our utilization data, we have saved 2.55 FTE based on our utilization data. So it's really very effective. So the next set of data is self-reported at intake. So this is all self-reported when somebody accesses care. So this is the gender slide. Age groups, and again, the service is available for students, staff, and families, which is why you see the entire spectrum of the lifespan. Ethnicities. And I just want to point out, when you look at that ethnicity slide, when somebody requests care from Care Solace, a family can request a therapist who is bilingual, a certain identity, who has experience working with different identities. They can request different languages. They can request somebody who has an understanding of different cultures. So all different services are available with Care Solace. So the mental health slide, multiple mental health conditions can be selected on this one. So co-occurring disorders could be possible on this one. So strategy 3, sources of strength. So this is another one that I'm just giving an update on because I know Amy Snyder presented on this. So we have multiple schools who have committed to implementing sources of strength at their school sites next year. And we also have schools who are working with public health specialists to determine what that might look like at their site next year. As a strategy, it hits the mark for our partnership with Healthy Schools. It increases the PYD. It has been shown to be effective in prevention and in intervention, and it is definitely an evidence-based program. What we love about Sources is it brings together trusted adults and students in schools. It also brings together students from all peer groups in schools, so it's not just the leadership group. It's students from all walks of life in schools. And the goal of Sources is belonging. And we know that belonging is something that is suicide prevention. The other thing I really love about Sources, I apologize, I've been talking all day, is that the vision of Sources of Strength, and I wrote this down because I really wanted to read this to you. The vision of Sources of Strength is to empower a well world through a diverse group in a school community who create their own community of strength where everyone belongs, has dignity, and can thrive, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. So it's definitely a program that focuses on diversity, inclusion, belonging. It's a pretty amazing peer-led program.
And then I'll talk a little bit about the last strategy. What I do want to say about the Sources strategy is so what we did with the funding for it was we wanted to remove barriers to having staff and students want to access it. So the original thought was that we were going to fund a semester-long section, so meaning we would fund teachers, and then we created elective courses where it could become an elective course, so a student could get a credit for being part of a Sources class, if you will, and then we could pay teachers to be the sponsor to teach the class. And so we have, and obviously through the year of working with schools and how they want to implement, We have some schools wanting to go with that strategy. We have some schools going with a club strategy. We have some schools going with a strategy where they're utilizing existing structures or other groups to add sources into it. So it's going to look different depending on the school you're at, but we're looking to by next year and the year after that to have at least all schools implement some part of it, as it's a major part of the strategy. And then finally, our fourth strategy is one that we're just starting to work on now, which is gender affirming practices training for students, staff, and the community. And I did put a piece of data down there that is some data that we centered around that, which was from Trevor Project saying usage of chosen name resulted in a 29% decrease in suicidal ideation and a 56% decrease in suicidal behavior. And so it's really that idea that we honor our students, we honor their identities when they're in our schools. And so our strategy for that right now is rather than do standalone trainings, I think what we're going to do is work with the lead coaches and help fund training for not only them to get more experience, go to some conferences, go to some specific trainings, but also fund summer work and other work for them to develop curricula and develop training so that that can be delivered through and integrated into their lead cohort work for students, staff, and community members. And so we haven't quite really started that yet, but that's where we're going with that. With the goal of sometime next year really starting to get that implemented and get that going. And so before we have Kinsey come up, are there any questions that you all have about the work we're doing with the Forward Project?
In relation to your last numbers on those percentages and the reduction when chosen names and pronouns are used, can you remind us of what the suicide rates are in terms of suicidal behaviors and suicidal ideation for LGBTQ youth?
I don't have that data right now with me. I can get that for you, but what we do know is that the rates and the incidents are much higher than for all other groups. And I think the data that we got from the student survey clearly indicates that the risk levels are much higher for that group. Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember from our session I went to at the OSBA conference, but I believe it was around 40% for LGBTQ youth. So this type of reduction is substantial. Thank you.
All right, well, if there are no questions about that, we'll have Kinsey come up and she can take it away.
Okay. Right. So I'm going to talk with you a bit about our bias incident data from this last semester of the 22-23 school year, the first half of the school year, and look at a district-wide snapshot with you of some of the basics of that data. I want to just qualify the conversation a bit about what this part of the conversation is and isn't. We're doing a lot of work around preventing bias incidents and a lot of work around how we respond when they happen. And tonight's conversation is really neither of those. Tonight's conversation is a pretty narrow look at the data itself, what is happening. And so, you know, the conversation around prevention and response are, you know, arguably more important than what we're going to talk about tonight. But tonight certainly informs both sides of that continuum. And, you know, I am happy to bring some team members to talk about the rest of that conversation. But tonight's really just focused on the incidents themselves and the data itself. And then also just to set expectations, I guess, this is really a quantitative look at experiences, which isn't quite a good match. So, you know, each incident is a complex situation. It is a series of interactions between human beings, and and 99% of that cannot be captured in what we're going to look at tonight. So tonight's numbers really do the incidents and the work around these incidents no justice, but it's important to look at them anyway. So we certainly have much more qualitative information about the stories behind the incidents, the humans involved in the incidents, and a much deeper level, a much more intimate level too of the actual data. But tonight is really a pretty high level look. It just, as it said, that they're just a snapshot of what's happening. And of course, the second we start sharing more of that qualitative information about a particular incident or types of incidents, we still have a pretty small community. And some of those immediately become clear who we're talking about, or, details that we also really want to protect people. And so this data is a pretty high level look, but I just also wanted to clarify that we are constantly looking in the process of responding to an incident and developing resources to prevent them in the first place. We are really thinking about the humans and the stories and the things that are happening much, much deeper than what you're going to see tonight. And just to set the bar even lower for the evening, this is really, we have been for the past 3 years, 4 years, really working on our infrastructure and our system around this, as far as awareness, calibration, reporting, data collection, and then data analysis. And it is, we've made some really great steps, and I'm really proud of our whole team and system. This has been a massive undertaking for years, involving, I think, every single department in our organization, human resources, Office of DEI, teaching and learning, IT, operations, everybody is involved in supporting this. And so, what you're going to see tonight is not our ending point. It is our current point in time with where we have grown into this. And we have a lot more that we are hoping to develop and do with the data itself, with our reporting procedures. But again, I'm really proud of this work. I work really closely with my counterparts in similar roles around the state, and I'm not aware of a single other district that has this level of analytics on their, or even reporting processes for collecting this level of information, let alone pulling this info back and analyzing it. And so it's not where we want it to be at a permanent level, but I'm really proud of our district. And again, I think we are, I can't say for sure, but I feel pretty confident saying I think we're the only district in the state that has this level of analytics on our incidents. So, and then lastly, that the definition of success with this is really messy. When we start to look at the data, how we know that we're making, what we do with this, and how do we know if what we're doing as far as prevention and response is impacting people in a positive way, if we're getting better at this, is not going to show up tonight. And I think that's probably going to take years to start to answer what that even means and how we can even tell in this information. So, so that's a really long conversation. But as we gather this level of data and get better at the types of data that we're sharing and reporting on, I think we will start to see trends that will start to help us figure out what success means. And obviously, success comes from our students and families and staff saying they feel safe, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel a sense of wellness and inclusion in our schools. And so this data doesn't honestly tell us much yet, but it helps us ask the next level of questions to grow our system. And we'll be doing a lot of that work with we've got some wonderful family leadership groups, student leadership groups, and so we'll be taking this conversation to them and having them work with us to think about what's missing in this data, what questions are coming up, what is our next step, how do we get better at continuing to grow. So, in the scope of the work, we're one of those like giant maps at the mall of like, you are here. We are at a teeny tiny point tonight in the process. So now that your expectations are nice and low, we'll jump in. I just wanted to start by situating this conversation in our equity stance, which this is not our complete equity stance, this is a portion of it. I would encourage everybody to be familiar with our equity stance and what we mean when we talk about equity and inclusion, and what our commitments are. because this work is, responding to incidents and preventing incidents is tough work, but there's a lot of awesome stuff happening as well. And so just as a reminder about why we're even having this conversation and why it's important to us, I thought it was important to just start by placing that at the front of our conversation. And the other thing that we're really hoping to do is make these, obviously these slides are now available to the public, but we also want to have these up in a way that is accessible to our public and our families on an ongoing basis. Whether that's quarterly or, however we can work out the sharing of this on a regular basis. We, by sharing this tonight and with our family and student advisory groups, are really hoping to be, transparent and develop some partnership around what this means to us collectively as a community, because this data by ourselves, we can look at it and come up with our own conclusions, but we know we need our community to help us think about what does this tell us, what questions does it help us ask. Okay, and then just a little bit of context on the reporting process itself and why we even have this tool. And first, just our district stance, separate from our equity stance. We don't tolerate bias and hate and discrimination in our schools. And how we are approaching that and messaging that and responding to that is, again, we're not going to see much of that broader conversation tonight. But because this is not something, those experiences are not something that we tolerate in our schools, we need a way to know if it's happening. We want to know. We want that information. We want the chance to address it and fix it and make it right between the parties involved. And so we need a communication pathway for that. So that's where this tool comes from. The primary purpose of the tool is activating resources and support. So when an incident happens and gets submitted through our reporting system, the goal is to get resources out to support the resolution of that incident, support the target, so make sure that they have what they need to feel supported, feel like there can be resolution, to feel like they are a part of the process of designing what does it mean to repair this incident, and who should be a part of that team helping the target. And then getting resources out to educate the offender, thinking about what consequences need to be involved, communicating with families. All of that activates as soon as a report is made. So that's the primary purpose of the tool. And then, of course, the secondary purpose that we are going to dig into tonight is it also provides us a lot of really key information about what's happening and to whom and by whom, so that we can work on the prevention and response pieces and get better at those, and make decisions about resources and how we approach our work. So, but I just, before we jump into the second one, wanted to clarify that the key purpose is activating resources. Okay, and then just some reminders or asterisks on the data. The numbers we're going to look at are not, it would not be accurate to say that the numbers we look at tonight represent the number of incidents happening in our schools. What we are looking at are the number of reports submitted, and that's pretty different for a number of reasons. First of all, there have been some incidents, several, where there have been duplicate reports. So maybe a staff member reports and a student and who was involved, and then maybe a student who was a witness. So we get 3 reports on the same incident. And so, that might skew our numbers a little bit. There's also some misreported complaints. So sometimes something comes into as a bias incident report that that doesn't involve bias. It was maybe a more general complaint about a different part of our system, but didn't involve bias or an incident involving hate or discrimination. So some of them are just misreported, and we know that some misreported incidents that go into our formal complaint system were actually bias incidents. So we're working to sort of, cross those over across the system and make sure they get correctly filed. But in some cases, there are some misreported complaints. And then we know, and maybe most importantly, we also know there's a lot of incidents happening that are not being reported. We know we don't have the trust of our whole community yet. We know that there's some wariness about what is this system and what are you going to do if I report it. And you know, I have a middle school child who just, adults getting involved in an incident is just going to make it worse for a 13-year-old kid. So there's a variety, you know, especially if it's a student who has an identity that is not represented by many staff members. You know, we know we don't necessarily have and haven't earned that trust yet with members of our community. So we know there's more happening than what's been reported so far. So for all of those reasons, we, and I will try to be careful tonight to talk about the number of reports submitted and not the number of incidents confirmed in Ben Lapine schools. Just because an incident does get reported, sometimes we have a staff member who overheard something and just thinks, yikes, I think I need to report that. And then in the support and investigation process, we determine, and all the students involved say, oh, no, that's not what happened. And so sometimes there's a report in there that, you know, we all confirm is not a bias incident. We're working on ways to note those so that they don't show up in final data, but just because something gets put into the system doesn't mean that, you know, that it is a confirmed bias incident. And then, again, importantly, this data doesn't tell us anything by itself. This data helps us ask questions to get better at the data collection process itself, better at responding, and then better at preventing them. So I have to keep trying myself to be careful not to make assumptions when I'm looking at these numbers about what I think it's telling me, or, oh, that means, or that says, because sometimes that's not necessarily what it says. It's just numbers, and we all will put our own you know, perspectives and lenses on those, but lots of conversation needed to continue to interpret what this is telling us and what questions to ask. So this is actually just going to be a snapshot on how many incidents were reported in prior years. So from back in September, the very first semester in September of 2019, that whole semester we had, I think it was 21 or 22, if I remember right. That was one of our first iterations of this process. We'd spent the year before kind of setting up how are we going to go about this? What does this even mean? And then we had an early approach to reporting in that year, and analyzed. That data was much easier to analyze because it was 22, and we could really almost look individually at those incidents. And then that red line, just, you know, a couple important worldwide things happened. And then once we were back officially in school, these are our next, as we grew the system, we adjusted the reporting tool. We'd been doing professional learning work with our staff. That middle bar, we had released the tool to administrators at that point. We were piloting a new version of the reporting tool. So that was admin access at that point. And then this, the January through June, that last bar was when all of our staff had access to the reporting tool last spring or last semester. And so we, you know, you can see jumps based on people who have access to it, and also we were doing a ton of awareness work around what do we even mean when we say bias incident. So awareness and access, we're seeing that growth happening there. And then just looking back at this last semester of this school year from September through end of January, we had 324 reports submitted to the system related to possible bias incidents. For some context, there were 45 formal complaints made through, you know, non-bias incident complaints made. Our Safe Oregon tip line saw about 100 reports made in the same amount of time. So just a little scope on that one. And then what types of incidents? This is probably the most often asked questions. So, okay, of the 324, what are they about? What's happening? So this is a quick snapshot of the types of reports being submitted. So you can see based on identity, some demographic factors, race, ethnicity is at about 50% of the incidents involve race or ethnicity in some way. About 27-28% relate to gender identity or gender expression or sexual orientation. There's hopping up to the top yellow bar or chunk. There is one related to sex, which is a pretty arbitrary separation from gender identity expression, sexual orientation, just because that typically you'd see that in one category. Those tended to be more related to situations, maybe more, I don't know if traditional is the right word, Title IX type situations. And then age, disability, religion, native language, national origin, citizenship were all different categories that showed up as well. I think it's really important to note a couple things with this data. Reading through and responding to each of these incidents in partnership with school teams and members of Office of DEI team, one of the things that's pretty clear is some need to continue professional learning and work with students on these categories. So for example, several incidents related to a parent submitting a complaint because they didn't receive a newsletter in, a school newsletter, classroom newsletter, or other communication in their native language, and would mark that as related to race, ethnicity. And while it certainly is related to race and ethnicity, it maybe primarily should have been marked native language, and you can mark multiple boxes as well. We absolutely understand the need to represent intersectionality as well. So a lot of these incidents are cross, they might be related to disability, race, ethnicity, and religion, for example, multiple categories. But we know that there is this data, I would call it kind of squishy, in that we know we need to refine a little bit. There's been some incidents where race, ethnicity was identified, and we know disability played a part in that target's experience as well. So, so that's just a quick snapshot of the types of incidents happening K-12 in the last semester. And those are purely based on the reporter and what they shared. We didn't do any sort of deciding if that was right or wrong. Who is making the reports? So here you can see a snapshot, K-12 across the district. The majority are coming from employees reporting about incidents they are seeing, observing, experiencing, or being told about. Student reported is also growing. You can see that's a solid chunk. And then we have parent reports, community member, et cetera, as significantly fewer of those so far. We've done, obviously, with prior years of rolling out the reporting tool, we've really focused hard on employee access and awareness, and that's clear that that we're doing okay with that. And then this fall with our bias incident student lessons was the first time students learned of this tool and were able to have access and make their own reports. So seeing a good increase in students accessing that, definitely something we want to keep working with students on. And then families, we've shared it in a few ways with families through our district newsletter, and we'll put it on our website as well so that it's accessible there. But clearly a need to continue some work with our community at making sure that people are aware and feel comfortable using it. Who are the targets? As a whole, district K-12, about 96% of our targets through the incidents that have been reported are students. We do have some incidents where staff were identified as the target, and then that other one would be family, community members. Who are the offenders? So similarly, we see a majority of students as offenders and a chunk where staff are reported, and then other, again, that could be family member, community member. And so this is the point, I think, where people want to start, okay, so does that mean that the majority of these are student to student based on those two? And the data doesn't tell us that, and we have to be careful, but the majority of targets are being reported as students, the majority of offenders are being reported as students, but certainly, we have seen reports involving staff and students, staff and staff, family member and staff, so, a variety in that way. One piece of data that's super interesting to us is, repeat offenders, and while that's not something that can be, because on the reporting form, we want students to be able to fill it out themselves, and if we ask them to need to know that type of information, that gets really hard for a student to know if a kid who they had an offensive interaction with is a repeat offender or not. That's something that we would then have to do on the back end, which is something that we are absolutely doing as we respond to each incident. I mentioned earlier, each one is a set of humans and a complex situation. I don't think we've found a very simple one of these yet. And our staff work very, very closely with the target, with the offender, with the bystanders and witnesses, with the families. And so if there's a repeat offender, that comes up into our conversation as we design what's going to be the response in this one. And we'll talk about, this student maybe had this prior incident happen. How does that influence our decisions around consequences and education and family engagement? So we certainly know that information at a very qualitative, personal level about each of our students in this conversation, and it's something that on the back end of the form we're working on ways that we can quantify it a bit more. I think there's probably some interest in seeing that information, but if we make any tweaks at this point in the form, it kind of throws our whole spreadsheet and ability to do this kind of analysis off. So over the summer, we'll make those adjustments so that starting the next year, like I said, we just keep learning and growing and then try something and then we learn and grow and try something. And so those are definitely, we have a long list of tweaks that we want to make to the form itself, to the process. So right now, what we're really able to look at is offenders by role, but we also are doing a lot of work in the response process. We know immediately when a student is a repeat offender, for example, and work that into the process. And then this one, where are the incidents occurring? This is another example where the form itself didn't explicitly ask for this information, which means it's really hard to pull a nice, clean graph for this, to put on a slide right here. Hallways and classrooms are the biggest area for sure. I mean, our kids spend most of their time in classrooms, and then hallways are a time where there's a lot of passing by and interactions happening. And then the remaining incidents or locations or other spots that we're seeing incidents as well. We've made a tweak on the back end of the form where we are already starting to be able to tease out, almost always in the report, the reporter will share I was sitting in class and this thing happened, so we can immediately see that was a classroom incident. Or this person yelled this out in the hallway, and between 5th and 6th period, we can immediately see that was a hallway incident. So we are now, for the second semester, collecting that data by hand so that we can have graphs about where is this happening, which will inform, again, prevention and response education. And then response, this is another one that I know we are very, very eager to see more quantitative data around, and I'm guessing our community is as well. And again, tonight's conversation is not about how we are designing response. This by itself is a whole conversation. What I will say is some of the items up here are non-negotiable. They are required actually by state law that we do every time. So we must provide immediate support for the target. We must, obviously investigate and have some process. Family communication, education, and repair are also required by state legislation that we engage in those processes. What exactly that looks like and what that means can be different depending on the situation and the people involved. But those are not something that you're ever going to see, well, in 50% of the cases we talk to the family, because that is, an expectation already that 100% of the time we are engaging with families. And educating the offender and repairing as in creative ways. So really the data that we're starting to collect by hand on the back end, because again, we can't really tweak the form at this point, is around what types of consequences are being implemented. How often are we using something like in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension? How often is there a loss of privilege? For example, a kid sitting out of a sports activity if there was something that came up during a practice or a competition. and then what types of resources, you know, how often are we pulling in community partners to support those repair processes? And then, you know, this one is a little muddled to include in a conversation around consequences because a restorative circle is not a consequence. And most of the time, there are consequences and repair happening in, if not all of the time, in each of these situations. But it's also interesting to us to know in what percentage of these incidents are we having formal restorative circles, you know, that type of stuff. So we're trying to do that on the back end for this second semester. We just realized, oh, the form literally has no way of pulling that data out and providing the pretty graphs. So hopefully by the end of this next semester, we will have some data on a few of these items. And then, like I said, a few others of the items in this list are 100% every time. One of the things we're working on in particular, and I appreciate, we've had some families in some of our advisory groups who have worked with us on sort of, we got really good pretty quickly at that initial family communication right away when there's been an incident, letting the offending family, you know, the family of the offending student know what happened, letting the family of the target know right away and talking with them about what does repair look like and mean to your child. You know, our families can't necessarily tell us, we want to see this consequence, but they help us think about what does it mean to support your child through this, who should be walking with us side by side in that process, and what does repair mean to you. But some families have helped us sort of look at, and we want to know throughout the whole process. We want to have continued communication. And so how do we circle back with families at each step of the decision-making process, and to circle back at the end and make sure there's closure for everyone, and including the bystanders or witnesses to make sure that anybody who saw or, you know, overheard that incident is clear on the accountability, you know, transparency around, you know, we can't ever share specifics of discipline for a particular individual, but we can make sure that everybody who saw the incident and was thus impacted by the incident knows that there was, you know, accountability and follow through. So those are pieces that we have really started increasing in the last several months. And I mean, this list right here, it feels like, okay, yeah, those, you know, those are the types of things we should be doing, and they take an extreme amount of time and effort and energy and empathy and you know, just reflection, self-reflection on the part of our staff to think about, who am I the one to do this step? Should I bring in someone else? How do we go about this? What does it look like to support someone through this? And our staff have been amazing at these steps and really working hard at, you know, our principals are pouring time and energy into these steps, and our teachers and other staff are as well. So definitely a resource-intensive process on the response end of things. And you know, in spite of public education never having quite enough resource, I think our team has been just growing by leaps and bounds with regard to this, and we have so much work to do still. But again, in the scope of the process, I think we've seen a lot of growth recently with these steps. And then this next set, and I will click through this quite a bit faster, but this is really just a look by level, so elementary, middle, and high school at these incidents, so that you get a sense of, you know, age group. There's some interesting differences that are incredibly important as we're designing response and prevention and education to be aware of for different levels. So just by number of reports submitted, you can see our middle schools are reporting the highest number. Types of incidents by level. So this is where I will click through slightly faster so you can just kind of see the flow of the graphs. So elementary, you can see majority, race, ethnicity, and well, I'll come back to that comment in a second. Middle school, you can see kind of an increase in some of the other categories. To high school, again, you see that increase continuing to grow. So who is making reports by each level? Elementary, the vast majority are made by employees, which makes sense. The tool is not the most accessible tool for a 5-year-old kindergarten student. So when a student reports an incident, it is almost always an employee who's reporting at the elementary level. And I would say that, see if I can go backwards on the slides without messing this up. When we think about at the elementary level that it is staff making the majority of the reports, and this really large category around race, ethnicity at the elementary level, we have really been working hard within our equity and inclusion conversations to think pretty deeply about race and ethnicity in our community and that experience for our community members of color. And so I think we're seeing some of our employee reflection and skill development in this area showing up where, in this category where employees are reporting most of these. And, again, these graphs of the types are probably the squishiest just because many of these incidents are very intersectional as far as identity and overlapping areas of bias, but I think that's also a strength of our team, really starting to recognize issues of race and ethnicity. And again, we have a lot of work to do around that, as with many of these categories, but I just wanted to give kudos to our team. I think it's something that elementary is, along with all of our levels, really thinking hard about. So then who's making reports? We just looked at elementary. And then here's middle. So you see that increasing student participation in the reporting process. And then this is high school. So again, you see that growing the older students get. Who are the targets? So here's elementary, middle, and high. So again, some growth in those other categories and a redistribution slightly of who the targets are through the reports. And then again, who are the offenders by elementary, middle, and high. So you see a growing, as students are reporting more and becoming more aware of their education and their experiences and finding their voice more as leaders in our system, you start to see shifts in some of this data. And then, like I said, we have so much more work to do with all of this. This is the latest iteration of this process, and we're already outgrowing this, the data that we have available now. We have some changes in place for next semester, and we have many more that we want to make moving forward. We have qualitatively much more information than is able to be captured here, but wanted to just give you a super broad snapshot of the information. We do have a web page that when you click on that top link, takes you to some information about our bias incident reporting. What is a bias incident and what's a typical response process? And then it also has the link to the reporting tool itself that is will be shortly available on our district website front page. Our equity stance is also linked there with several related policies, and then ways to contact us if there's additional questions. So that would also be available as we share this information with our community via a website version of this information or other pathways to be really transparent about this level of data snapshot. We want people to engage with us. We want to have more conversation. We know this doesn't represent, like I said at the beginning, these are humans and these are complex experiences. And data like this almost makes me cringe a little bit because it does not do justice to what's happening both with the incidents themselves as well as with the response and prevention work. But hopefully that gave you a snapshot of the data, and I'm happy to take any questions here as well.
Are you seeing any differences between schools, or is it fairly consistent with like the number of cases being reported?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely some difference between schools just as far as numbers of reporting. And one of the reasons we didn't put up school-specific data is because sometimes, depending on the population of students at a school, if we were to share school-specific data, it would become immediately apparent exactly who the target was. And then, we start to run the danger of sharing or disclosing information about particular students or families. So we couldn't share that data here, but certainly there are some differences, and that's, I think, a natural part of the process. We've already seen, from schools who have very few reports to schools who have a lot of reports. Over the last 3 years or so, we're seeing that shaking together a little bit more as people start to calibrate. Well, what are you reporting? Well, would you report this? And how do we do that? And so, and really, we've been focused on when in doubt, report it. And, there's no harm in reporting it. So we're seeing that calibrate, but there's differences in just numbers of reports that we're working on, for sure.
Do we have the capacity to investigate all of the bias incidents that are being reported?
Yes. Yes, there's definitely every single one is reported. Investigated. Every single one has, immediate response and resources. It is maxing our capacity for sure. We are, as you see the growth of numbers of incidents and awareness and increasing, definitely we're keeping up at this point. But yeah, no reported incident is getting left without a full process and response. But
If I could add also that one of the very first takes in this draft of systemic review of this includes feedback on that, which one of the strengths was the fact that every one of our reports is getting investigated. One of the opportunities was the fact that it's on the backs of a very few amount of people, and not a large portion of staff are carrying the weight of this. And so one of the recommendations that they're pushing us to do is to expand the number of people that can contribute to those investigative processes. And then how do we then, not just investigations, but then how do we work on those restorations as that sees fit? And so that's one of the pieces that we're focusing on when we talk about next steps.
And we have an awesome, we've got some community partners who engage with us on response and support as applicable for situations, and they've been amazing partners. And our capacity with staff is really increasing around, owning this and being part of the response process, and knowing while we want to pull in partners, we also don't want to push the response process off to our partners entirely, that is very much our responsibility to be engaged in as school leaders and district leaders. And so we definitely are getting better at our response processes. And again, that's its own whole conversation. But yes, each one of those takes a lot of energy and deserves a lot of energy. So,
Mackenzie, thank you for the information. Appreciate it. But my concern is from looking at the data, just what you're giving us, it's mostly the stuff that's happening in classrooms and hallways, and it seems like it's mostly happening to our students of color, and they're our smallest population. So they're taking the brunt of a lot of these incidents, and it's coming to the students of color. And LGBTQ is next after that, I believe, and identity. So my question is to senior leadership, what are we doing to help the teachers have a better understanding of what their responsibility is to be in the hallways, as well as to start to learn to interrupt some of the stuff that happens when they see these things? I know we can have the incident reports, but what tools are we giving them to support them to make sure they're be able to do the things they need to do?
I don't care. Yes, absolutely. And I think that last meeting made us go way too long, so I'm going to try to keep it a little tighter. And I think much of that conversation is in the prevention response conversation that is outside of tonight's scope. But I will say that is an area that we are actively talking about as far as, if we're seeing this happening, like you said, if we're seeing this happening here to these people, by these people, what are we doing to respond? We have had, for a while now, we've been working with our administrative team on identifying bias incidents and calibrating, bringing scenarios to our admin team and saying, okay, let's say this thing just happened in your school. What do you do? What do you not do? Who are your resources? Where do you go? And working with them on calibrating their response. We've taken some of that work into our teacher level. We need to do more of that. And then we just offered our first that I'm aware of, our first ever required anti-bias training to all of our student and family-facing classified staff members who are, our classified staff do it all, but they are often the ones in the hallway, our campus monitors and our duty teachers out on recess that are around in those unsupervised, they're there, so they're not unsupervised, but, those more free play or break times. And so increasing their capacity to identify what do we mean when we talk about bias incidents, and then our partners with RJ&E led a part of that workshop on how do you interrupt, how do you, what do you say in that moment if you're the campus monitor walking by and you hear that or the student reports that. So definitely a lot of professional learning on a lot of levels going into that, and a lot more to do as well. So.
And I think I would like to add just a couple of things here. The creation of a data set gives us the point of conversation to talk about how do you build systems and capacity that are going to help people identify when and where it's my role to be a responder in this situation. And what we're seeing, and I don't know that there's a way for us to ever collect this data, is a more robust opportunity for people to dive in when something is happening and to be able to be willing to intervene. That's one of the things that's an output of this. And I think we've got to be careful that at an aggregate level that we don't make assumptions as to how this is all happening and how this is all going, because we have had much better conversations recently as you go over time about how that role of intervention looks for adults and what is my next step. And then what do I do once I have to address this and repeat offenses, and how do we deal with those? And the fact that if you talk about racially biased incidences just as one aspect of this, the fact that such a small portion of our population are the focal point of that, and then how do we then have conversations in classrooms, in schools, with staff, with adults, as who carries the burden of those interactions, and then what do we do with that once we start to know and understand how that interaction takes place? I would say, as Kinsey stated, those are specific to incidences that occur rather than the aggregation of all the data. And so I think that's a really great example, and being able to take samples and say, let's talk about how we might respond to this one, and tabletop that with staff and say, okay, what's our role? How do we deal with that?
My other thing is what is the parental portion of this as well, and educating them on things? Because right now, instead of using the N-word, they're calling black kids monkeys. So be prepared for that. That's what I'm saying. The little ways they try to use other language to be able to change the way they look at their way they present to students. Those are the type of things I'm talking about. Like, where is the parental side of this too? Because the majority of our district is predominantly Caucasian or less melanated. So that being said, how do we basically educate them to realize that, hey, you know what, it's your responsibility just as much as responsibility as kids of color and their parents as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thinking of this data as helping us to recognize and identify what specific problems are existing, and just the fact that we've now got a data set that is indicating how it's moving through all of our schools, gives us something to center the conversation around and what to talk about. And then what do we do if, as the system changes and grows, how we change and grow with it? And so that's a great example. And those are the kinds of things and the conversations that are coming of this, because now it's more in the forefront. Now we're talking about it. Now they're training on it. And our staff are, you hear them, right? They are so aware. They're less, they're more likely to get engaged. They're less likely to not engage in this conversation now, and how to go into really uncomfortable and challenging conversations, feeling like they're getting tools provided to them so they know how to deal with that as it's happening. And this data, we knew this as we identified this was going to be, this isn't an indication that it's increasing. This is an indication that awareness is being spread throughout the system, and that we're more actively going after it as a system and producing learning opportunities for everybody, including our students and families.
And I would just add, I think part of the incredible amount of time and energy that is being poured into response is going to educating, by state legislation, we're required to educate the offender, and just by association, that sometimes means families too, that when we call a family to say, hey, your student's receiving this consequence, and then we're gonna do this education work with them, and families often don't understand, and those become lengthy, in-depth, complex conversations, over the phone or in meetings between, a principal and a teacher, or, a principal and a family, or, sometimes it's a team of us connecting about that. But there is a lot of community education happening, as these incidents occur. I think one of the things we are starting to think about is how to get ahead of those too, so that it's not, I know for myself, if my kid is involved in an incident, my emotions are up to here and I have a harder time, listening, whether that's as target or offender or nothing related to bias, just, that when your kid's involved in something, that's maybe not the best time to be really learning something. But we are working individually with each family to make sure they understand the why behind the consequence and the education. And there have been some really amazing conversations and connections that have come out of that work, that many of our principals and team members in the Office of DEI and myself have been able to sort of forge with families through that really tough conversation about, why, for example, like you said, the word monkey is so harmful, and let's look at our own history together and really have some conversation, and that, immediately goes to a pretty deep spot for families of, emotional reaction to what their kids said and who they are as parents and what that means about their family. And those conversations are happening in almost all of these situations. And really, like I said, really cool learning is coming out of them in the vast majority of those. But again, that takes a significant amount of time. When I've gotten to be part of those, or in partnering with principals on approaching those, those are huge investments and very much worthwhile conversations. But yeah, lots more work to do there too.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to similar, well, I guess on the same line of what Marcus had just asked with, is there any way to track targets, well, students who have been repeated targets, especially, and thinking of, right, we were just talking about how belonging is suicidal prevention. And if race and ethnicity is the number one, issue with, and that affects the smallest part of our population, how are we ensuring that students who have been targets multiple times are doing okay?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I want to just zoom out a second from the question. I think race and ethnicity is up there the most. I'm not sure that data tells us or confirms that is the majority of incidents happening in our schools. It's definitely the majority of the reports submitted, and I think that could be in part, without being able to confirm through the data, I think in part that could be because of some of the work we have been trying to do as a system around awareness around race and ethnicity. So what we could be seeing there is that our employees who are making the majority of the reports are more aware of that because of the investments we're putting in there. And what it could be telling us is we've got some work to do around religious differences and making sure that folks of all religions feel good in our schools, because people aren't even attending to that issue. It could be, it could be telling us a lot of things. So I want to be careful to not jump to that. And we know there's a lot of racial bias incidents happening in our schools. So I'm not sure that that's something too hard to see from the data either. As far as the conversation around repeat targets, similar to repeat offenders, that's not a thing that currently, like I was mentioning earlier with the offenders, in our reporting tool, there isn't a great way to capture that by the reporter. Otherwise, it makes the reporting tool pretty inaccessible to our students, which we don't want to do. But again, as we are looking at responding to each incident, we know right away if a student has received, is a repeat target, we know that, and then the support, and the response and how we engage in that response process and the designing of that process takes that into account. So we know that information qualitatively. It's currently with the current form, we can't pull pretty graphs about that. Same thing with the repeat offenders, but it's on our list of things to sort through in the summer as we make tweaks going into next year too.
Thank you. And I thank you, Superintendent Cook, for noting the piece about increases, because I do think this is new and we see it in the data we've already got. But really, with any new initiative, the implementation, successful work will look like increases in reports because people are becoming familiar with the tool. And so just for our public, when they see these numbers increasing, that actually is most likely evidence that we're doing the work that we should be doing. Yeah. So, thank you. And we are now moving into, sorry, my computer just froze. We will now move into administrative policy and regulations. Hold on. I think it's, sorry. We're getting there. And this will be led by Superintendent Cook.
Everybody's leaving. It's policy time. Thank you, Chair Barnes-Delakia. As you all are aware and know, a part of an administrative policy review process is that we present the policies 1 month and then open them up for community and public feedback. We have a large number of policies this month that we're presenting. These are grouped somewhat thematically this month. It just happens to work out that most of these policies have to do with leave and absences, and as it pertains to the kind of the hiring season that we're in right now, and the fact that there's a new state leave policy going into place. And so this list of policies you see before you are aligned to those. And so just quickly want to go through that list, starting with the first one, GBA-AR, which is about veterans' preferences, includes updates as required by statute, which was modified most recently by some Senate bills. GCBD, which is /AP, leaves and absences. This is a complete rewrite of a policy to reflect appropriate policy title as well as what's legally required in district practices regarding employee leaves and their absences. It's also been renamed from an administrative regulation to an administrative policy. Also a note that this GCBD-AR was previously titled Staff Responsibilities. This AR will be retitled and reviewed next month. GCDB/GDBDB-AP, sorry, early return to work. This includes updates to reflect return to work and ADA processes that are currently in place as a district practice and aligns with Equal Employment Opportunity Commission guidance. We've also renamed this from an administrative regulation to an administrative policy. GCBDD-AR, employee work attendance. We are recommending for deletion as these issues are addressed in our collective bargaining agreements and our current employment contracts. Next one is GCBDA/GDBDA/AP, which is about family and medical leave. This includes updates to add the Military Family Leave Act and Oregon Military Family Leave Act, as well as updating the eligibility requirements. GCBDA-GDBDA-AR is family leave is now an administrative regulation that explains eligibility, process, and procedures for family leave. The next one is a mouthful, GCBDD/GDBDD/AP. This is specific to sick time. We reviewed this policy and we are not recommending any updates, but we just wanted to put that out for review, for community review. And JFCM-AP, threats of violence, has been updated to reflect current practices and involvement of the school threat assessment team, or otherwise known as STAS, as well as alignment with our equity-focused efforts. These policies will be out on the feedback process, available on the feedback process and on the webpage for a period to be reviewed over and discussed at the next month's meeting in April. Thank you.
Can I make one suggestion?
Absolutely.
It's on GCVDA/GDVDA-AP. But family medical leave, perhaps considering changing the title as well so that it better reflects that it's military family leave as well as medical.
Thank you for that feedback.
We are now at board comments. We will start with Director Chadwick.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who presented tonight. Super insightful and a lot of great things going on in our schools. I wanted to share that last week, Director Montgomery and I had the privilege to attend an interview at Bend Senior High School between Nordic skiing state champion Nev Gerard, Mel Briggs-Lawrence, and Lauren Fleischman. Mel is a former professional runner and is now a cross-country coach at Summit High School. Lauren, as many of you might know, is a two-time 5,000-meter champion and was a former professional athlete with Nike. And Lauren had recently released a book called Good for a Girl, My Life Running in a Man's World. And the interview focused on gender bias in sport and definitely solicited some great questions from high schoolers who attended. And this was all part of Matt Fox's Design Justice class over there. So really cool. Again, it was awesome seeing engagement with the students there, asking follow-up questions. Yeah, so great presentation.
So I was at Bear Creek on Friday, had a great visit with Lisa Burke, and one of my favorite parts of my visit was the time I spent in the cafeteria with the custodian. You know, sometimes when you get into a school and you just talk to the people who really are seeing everything and, you know, you get insights. And one of the things he shared with me were very passionate ideas about our use of trash cans and trash bags and the environmental impact of those things. And I thought about, you know, our environmental work and like, wow, why aren't we having a conversation about trash cans in our schools, the size bags we used? He estimated that if we changed the size of bags, made them be full, and didn't use as many trash cans, that we would save somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. So it was just one of those like, have we actually looked at that? I'm going to suggest that. And then I just wanted to kind of finish the conversation that we were having with Sean. Melissa, you'd asked about data around LGBTQ youth and suicide, and so I just pulled up some facts from the Trevor Project. So suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people aged 10 to 24. And lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth are at significantly increased risk. LGBTQ youth are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers. The Trevor Project estimates that more than 1.8 million LGBTQ youth, which they've defined as 13 to 24, seriously consider suicide each year in the US, and at least one attempts suicide every 45 seconds. The Trevor Project's 2022 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health found that 45% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including more than half of the transgender and non-binary youth. So just in the time of this school board meeting, how many students and youth in our country tried to complete suicide? And with attacks on these marginalized youth ramping up around the country, I would sadly think that those numbers will go up. And so I just want to say I'm proud of the work we are doing in this community to reduce violence and protect our students' lives, because it's very, very important work. So thank you, everyone who's participating in that.
Yes, and I would like to say I am looking forward to having the town hall meeting at Central Oregon Community College this Friday for our students, from our high school students. It is RJE's 5th year of actually doing this town hall, and I'm looking forward to it, to be able to work with our students on the various things that they may need from our different schools. It's all high school students. And please, when these students do come back to the various high schools, please make sure you take the time to listen to what some of the feedback they're giving you, because they're giving you insight on what's going on in some of their schools. So I'm looking forward to attending that with Superintendent Cook. And Keena as well, sorry. I forgot for a second.
Thank you. I will reiterate that appreciation to all that presented tonight and the work that Superintendent Cook has been leading in our district. In terms of work between board meetings, a couple of highlights. In addition to cooking breakfast at Ensworth and, what was our second one? No. VTA, Ventec Academy. I also was able to cook lunch as a mom for teachers at Pacific Crest. And I want to also appreciate Principal Sean Keating at Pacific Crest, both as a mom and a board member. I feel like his communication to families and his institution of monthly coffees with families is really a leading edge in our district in terms of family engagement. And so thank you to Principal Keating. Finally, I spent 2 days at a summit at OSU Cascades that was funded and facilitated by the Laboratory for the American Conversation. And it was on misinformation and disinformation. And there were a few local leaders at that, but then people from literally around the world, and talking about that, the impact of that in different spaces. And it just reminded me not only of what we face as school board members, but also of the importance of information literacy for our children and all of the work that we do in the education sector to support our children in terms of information and misinformation. And so want to appreciate OSU Cascades for facilitating that learning experience. I certainly took things away that I am eager to share. With that said, our next meeting is a budget committee meeting and then a regular business meeting scheduled for April 11th, 2023. And this meeting is adjourned.